The street was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that made even the faintest sound seem amplified. Claire Bennett sat at her kitchen table, tapping away at her laptop, the glow of the screen casting sharp angles across her face. Her apartment was neat, everything in its place, nothing out of order, and yet something about the night felt off. A soft creak came from the window behind her. Claire froze, the tip of her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand. At first, she thought it was the old frame settling in the chill of the night, but then the sound came again, deliberate, like a fingernail dragged across wood. She turned slowly, her heart ticking louder in her chest than the computer's hum. Nothing, just the pale moonlight spilling across the floor. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself, though her voice sounded hollow even in her own ears. She tried to focus back on her work, but the prickle at the back of her neck refused to fade. The power flickered suddenly, plunging her apartment into darkness for a heartbeat before the lights came back on. Claire's stomach dropped. She wasn't alone. Her phone buzzed violently on the counter. She snatched it up, relief flooding her momentarily. Maybe someone was just texting her. But the message made her blood run cold. "I'm inside. Do you know who I am?" Claire's fingers shook as she fumbled to reply. No response. The room felt impossibly small now, shadows stretching along the walls as if they were alive. Her mind raced. She lived alone. She had no enemies, or so she thought. A sudden knock at the door made her jump. Not a usual knock, but sharp, quick, almost impatient. She backed away slowly, her hand grazing the counter, sending her coffee sloshing. The thought of running never crossed her mind fast enough. Her instinct screamed at her to stay silent. Somewhere across the street, a car door slammed, a distant dog barked, but inside, Claire's world had narrowed to the narrow hallway and the soft, deliberate steps coming from above. She tried dialing 911, but her phone screen flashed, "No service." Panic clawed at her chest. Her laptop wouldn't connect to the Wi-Fi either. It was as if every connection, every lifeline to the outside world had been severed. Claire's breath caught. She heard it again, a shuffle, a whisper just beyond the door. Not words, just the sound of someone moving with calculated purpose, someone who knew where she was, what she was doing. In the corner of her eye, she caught a shadow slipping across the living room wall. She held her breath, barely daring to blink. The silhouette paused near the kitchen, then moved on, slow, deliberate, like a predator enjoying the terror it had already sown. Claire's instinct screamed at her to hide. She ducked under the table first, then crawled to the bedroom, dragging her chair behind her to barricade the door. She could hear the soft creaking of footsteps in the living room now, and a sudden soft tap at the bedroom window made her flinch violently. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Why her? She thought back to work, the confidential documents she'd accidentally seen, the encrypted email she wasn't supposed to read. Could it be connected? The thought made her stomach turn, but she had no time to dwell. From somewhere deep in the house, a muffled sound, a metallic scrape, then silence made her flinch. She pressed herself against the wall, listening intently. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. Then, unmistakably, her phone buzzed again. She dared a glance. Another message. "I see you. Always." Claire's heart raced. "This isn't real," she muttered to herself, though the whisper of movement behind the bedroom door proved otherwise. Someone was inside her apartment, watching, waiting. She reached for the baseball bat she kept under the bed, a gift from her brother when she first moved in. Hands shaking, she gripped it tightly, her knuckles white. Every creak of the floorboards outside her door made her jump. Every shadow cast by the flickering streetlight through the blinds looked like a figure, a face she didn't want to imagine. And then she heard it, a whisper, soft, low, almost intimate, carried through the thin bedroom door. "Claire." Her blood ran cold. How did he know her name? She wasn't just being robbed. This was personal. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, a distant note of hope. Claire wanted to call out, to scream for help, but the whisper whispered again, "Don't make a sound." Her chest tightened, she swallowed, her tongue dry, her mind trying to race through options. Could she escape through the balcony? Through the window? The only way out seemed the door behind her, where the sound of footsteps had paused but could start again at any moment. She forced herself to think. Every horror movie she'd ever watched, every self-defense article she'd read, every story about a home invasion, she had to remember it all. She inched to the bedroom door, holding her breath. A shadow moved across the living room floor. A hand touched the doorknob. Claire froze. Her body felt like it had been turned to stone. The knob jigged, then stopped. She counted seconds, each one like an eternity. Then the sound of a window sliding open somewhere in the apartment, slow, careful. Whoever it was, they were exploring, searching. And then a faint sound, a police radio chatter from down the street. A neighbor had probably called for something unrelated. It gave her the courage to move. Slowly, silently, she crept to the window, feeling the cold metal of the frame under her fingers. Outside, the street was still eerily empty. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had to survive the night. She had to outsmart whoever was inside, and she had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. Somewhere in the shadows of her apartment, the stranger paused, as if sensing her awareness. And then, the faintest rustle of paper, a note had been left on the kitchen counter. "I'm closer than you think." Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. The night had just begun, and she knew deep down that whoever had broken in, whoever had been watching, wasn't done yet. Claire's hands shook as she clutched the edge of the counter, staring at the note. "I'm closer than you think." The words blurred before her eyes, the paper suddenly seeming larger than life, as if it were the only proof of reality she could hold on to. She knew one thing for certain. She could no longer wait passively. Whoever was inside her home wasn't just robbing her. They were playing a game, and she was the target. The lights flickered again, a strobe or shadows across the room. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. The front door had been locked when she returned from the kitchen, yet the note had appeared. Someone had slipped it in without a sound, someone who knew every corner of her apartment. She decided to check for surveillance devices. Claire's work in IT had made her cautious about digital security. She knew the basics of scanning a room for hidden cameras and microphones. She crawled along the floor, scanning vents, bookshelves, even the small smoke detector above her bed. Then, almost too easily, she spotted it. A tiny black lens concealed behind a picture frame. Her stomach lurched. "They've been watching me," she whispered to herself, voice trembling. Not just tonight, not just this break-in. Weeks. They had been inside her apartment, silently observing her routines, her habits, her every move. She grabbed her laptop, hoping to access any security footage, any clue, but the Wi-Fi was dead. Her phone remained disconnected, the battery now reading 1%. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to think. "Okay, Claire," she murmured, steeling herself. "They're smart. I have to be smarter." She barricaded the bedroom door with her dresser and moved quietly to her small study, hoping to create a temporary safe zone. There, she found the spare key she had hidden months ago, the one she never planned to use. She considered fleeing, but the thought of someone outside waiting for her, watching, knowing, froze her. She had to outsmart the intruder. Meanwhile, Detective Mark Halley was piecing together reports from the neighborhood. A series of break-ins had occurred in the last month. No items stolen, no fingerprints left behind, just fear inflicted on each resident. Halley's seasoned instincts told him that this was the work of someone meticulous, someone who studied their victims, perhaps even chose them carefully. And now, Claire Bennett's case had become central. Back in her apartment, Claire moved with calculated precision. She used mirrors to check corners before advancing, listening to every creak, every faint shuffle. But the intruder seemed to anticipate her every move. The lights flickered in a pattern she couldn't explain, as if signaling her next step or her next mistake. A soft click came from the kitchen. Claire froze. She peeked through the hallway and saw the silhouette of someone at the fridge, barely moving. The figure didn't open it, didn't take anything. It was a ritual, a display of control. She realized then this wasn't about theft, it was about fear. Her heart pounded. She considered calling Detective Hallie, but with no service and a dying phone, it was impossible. She had to survive until he could arrive, or until the intruder made a mistake. Claire remembered the baseball bat under her bed. Slowly, she crept back, keeping low, the bat trembling in her hands. She could feel every heartbeat, every drop of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The room seemed alive with shadow, every corner a possible hiding place. Then, from the living room, a whisper. "Claire!" Her blood ran cold. The name, spoken with a familiarity that made her skin crawl, wasn't just a threat, it was intimate, personal. Whoever this was, they knew her, and they wanted her to know they did. Claire's mind raced. Could this be someone from work? Someone she'd crossed without realizing the danger? She thought of the confidential emails she had accidentally accessed, of the files she had read that weren't meant for her eyes. She had always assumed discretion would protect her, but now it was obvious. Someone had noticed, and they were punishing her in the only way they could. She moved again, quiet as a shadow, toward the spare key in the small balcony. The window was ajar slightly. Maybe she could escape. Maybe she could buy herself some time. But the soft scrape of shoes on hardwood made her freeze. The intruder was inside the apartment, close enough to feel her presence. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't dare look, but the vibration was insistent, urgent. She checked. Another message. "You can't hide from me. I know every move you make." Her fingers shook. The intruder was not just inside her apartment. They were inside her mind now, controlling her thoughts, her fears, her every heartbeat. Determined, Claire moved toward the balcony, keeping low. She paused, listening. Footsteps. Pause. Footsteps. Pause. She realized the intruder was following a rhythm, a pattern. They were studying her. Every step, every breath, every reaction, measured, calculated. She took a deep breath and leapt onto the balcony railing, heart hammering. Outside, the street was empty, silent, deceptively so. She climbed down carefully, every muscle tense. If anyone was watching from the street, she would be caught. If they had tracked her routines for weeks, they would have anticipated her escape attempt. And then the sound of a car door slamming down the street, a faint whistle, a sign that someone had seen movement, but was it her or the intruder? Claire's mind raced. She couldn't run blindly. She had to create a plan, a strategy. She ducked into the shadows of the neighboring yard, keeping low, moving silently. Every streetlight passed felt like an exposure, a moment where the predator could strike. Minutes passed. Hours, it seemed. The night stretched endlessly. Claire realized that survival wasn't just about escaping, it was about outthinking the person who had invaded her home, her sanctuary, her life. She remembered the hidden camera in her apartment. Whoever it was had been watching her, studying her patterns. Maybe they had left other cameras, other listening devices. Maybe every move she made could be seen, predicted. She needed to create a diversion, something the intruder wouldn't expect. Her eyes fell on a small toolbox she had left on the balcony, a remnant of a weekend project. She grabbed it, shaking, and hurled it across the yard. The clatter echoed in the night, a deliberate, chaotic sound. From inside the apartment, a faint curse, a hurried shuffle, then silence. Claire held her breath, crouching in the shadows, waiting. She didn't dare move until she was certain the intruder was distracted. Across the street, a light flicked on. Detective Hallie's patrol car had arrived, drawn to reports of unusual activity in the neighborhood. Claire's chest heaved with a mixture of relief and dread. The night was far from over, but she had survived this first stage. She ducked into an alleyway, keeping low, watching her own apartment. The window glowed faintly, shadows moving behind the blinds. Whoever had broken in was still there, still watching, still controlling. But now, Claire had a new weapon, knowledge. She knew the intruder's methods, and she could anticipate the next move. And deep down, a terrifying thought took hold. This night was far from over. The game had begun, and Claire Bennett was determined to play and survive. Claire crouched in the alley, her back pressed against the rough brick wall, shivering despite the warm night air. Her heart still raced from the adrenaline of her escape moments ago, but fear had evolved into a sharper edge: calculation. She needed a plan, an edge over someone who had been inside her apartment, someone who had known her routines better than she did herself. The faint glow of her apartment windows reminded her of how vulnerable she had been. She knew one thing: the stranger had watched her, studied her habits, her late-night routines, her solitary life. Every time she thought she had a moment of safety, the shadow of the intruder loomed. And now, with Detective Hallie on the street, she realized she wasn't entirely alone, but that didn't make her safe. Inside her apartment, the intruder moved deliberately, almost like a choreographed dance. The note had been a warning, the toolbox diversion a minor annoyance. They weren't just intruding, they were testing her, mapping her reactions. She had to anticipate the next move. Claire's mind raced. She remembered every creak, every whisper, every shadow that had crossed the walls. And then it clicked. The intruder wasn't acting randomly. There was a pattern, a rhythm to their movements. Every time she had made a noise, every attempt to flee, every glance toward the hallway or window, they had responded in a way that was almost predictable. She slipped back into her apartment through the side door she had pried open, careful not to disturb the faint layer of dust on the floorboards. Inside, the place was eerily silent. Nothing had been touched since the toolbox distraction. Or had it? She shone her flashlight across the room, revealing every detail: the misplaced chair, the faint scuff on the kitchen floor, the curtains slightly pulled aside where she hadn't left them. Someone had been inside recently, watching, waiting. Her phone buzzed again. She froze. She hadn't checked it. The glow of the screen illuminated her face in the dim room. Another message: "I can see everything, always. You can't hide." Claire's stomach twisted. Whoever this was, they had invaded her digital life as much as her physical one. She realized that survival required more than physical evasion. She needed to outthink a mind that was already 2 steps ahead. Detective Hallie was now outside, coordinating with nearby patrols, checking CCTV footage from neighboring streets. The pattern was undeniable: a series of break-ins targeting people who had discovered sensitive information, yet nothing had been stolen, just fear. Claire's case fit perfectly. The intruder wasn't after possessions, they were after control, obsession, and terror. Claire moved with deliberate care, placing mirrors to observe her surroundings without exposing herself. Every shadow became a tool, every reflection a window into the intruder's tactics. She realized that the predator had left small, calculated messages in the apartment: the note, the displaced items, the soft whispers. Each one was designed to manipulate her mind, to make her doubt reality. And then came the call. Her phone rang, displaying a blocked number. Hesitation gripped her, but she answered. "Claire." The voice was calm, measured, intimate in a way that made her blood run cold. "You're learning. I like that. But it's not enough." Her grip tightened around the flashlight. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I'm closer than you think. I've been here longer than you realize, and soon you'll understand why this is happening." The line went dead. Her pulse thundered. Whoever this was, they weren't just physically inside her apartment, they had infiltrated her sense of security, her perception of reality. Determined, she devised a risky plan. She would leave a decoy, a false trail, to see how the intruder reacted. She placed her phone visibly on the couch, connected to the Wi-Fi she had secretly reactivated through a small portable hotspot. She left the lights dimmed, shadows exaggerated with carefully angled lamps. Then she moved to her bedroom, hiding and waiting. Minutes passed like hours, then a faint shuffle, almost imperceptible in the living room. The intruder had taken the bait. Her heart raced as she watched their reflection in the mirror she had positioned to see without exposing herself. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, tracing the path she had set. Each step was measured, cautious, but confident. They knew this apartment as intimately as she did. Meanwhile, Detective Hallie had started noticing patterns on nearby surveillance cameras. A vehicle always parked in the same spot days before each reported break-in was caught repeatedly driving slowly past Claire's apartment. But when Hallie attempted to track it, it vanished, leaving behind only a single glove. The intruder was meticulous, always one step ahead, almost invisible. Back in the apartment, Claire saw movement near the doorway. The intruder was reaching towards the couch, towards the phone. She realized with a jolt they were monitoring her digital footprint, trying to see if she would reach out for help, if she would reveal herself. Her mind raced. If she could mislead them digitally, she could buy time. She whispered into the shadows, a plan forming. She would leave the apartment, seemingly fleeing, while secretly retreating to a hidden hallway she had discovered during the night. The intruder would follow the false trail, exposing themselves to Detective Hallie's patrols outside. Claire's hands were steady now. She moved silently, placing small objects as decoys, subtly shifting shadows to exaggerate her supposed movements. Her pulse was a drumbeat, her senses sharp, every step calculated, every breath measured. Then she saw it, a masked figure at the window, motionless, observing her from the outside now, not inside but still watching. Claire's stomach lurched. She realized that this was more than a home invasion. It was an obsession. The intruder wasn't merely trying to harm her. They were studying her, understanding her, predicting her. She whispered her plan aloud, almost to herself. "You won't control me. I'll outsmart you." And as she crept towards the hidden hallway, she realized something terrifying. The intruder had been in her home, yes, but the fear, the psychological manipulation had followed her outside. Every shadow, every whisper, every pattern of movement now had a new layer. She was no longer reacting, she was calculating. And that, she realized, might be the only way to survive. The night stretched endlessly, the streets silent but for distant sirens and Hallie's patrol car in the distance. Claire Bennett had survived the first confrontation. She had learned the intruder's tactics, but she also knew the truth. The night was far from over. The predator was patient, meticulous, and watching. And the final act of this game was still to come. Somewhere in the shadows of her apartment and in the quiet streets beyond, a figure waited, knowing that the real battle had only just begun. The night air was thick, almost suffocating, as Claire Bennett crouched behind a low brick wall across from her apartment. Her limbs ached from hours of tension, her mind a whirlwind of fear, calculation, and determination. She had survived the intruders' games, outsmarted some of their traps, and now she knew one thing with certainty. The night would not end until she faced the predator directly. Detective Mark Hawley had arrived in full force, coordinating patrols in the neighborhood and piecing together the fragmented clues of the intruder's movements. From the discarded glove, to the surveillance patterns, to the odd rhythmic shuffling inside Claire's apartment, Holly had an unnerving suspicion. This intruder wasn't acting randomly. They were calculated, patient, obsessed. And if Claire had been marked, the pattern suggested the confrontation would escalate. Claire crept toward her apartment building. She had devised a plan, a trap to draw the intruder into a space where she could control the environment. A nearby abandoned warehouse, 2 blocks down, offered shadows, cover, and a way to isolate the predator. If she could lure them there, Holly could intervene. As she approached, she felt a prickle at the back of her neck. Movement, slow, deliberate, just at the edge of the streetlight. The intruder had followed her, of course. How could they not? Weeks of observing her routines meant every footstep, every breath, every glance had been catalogued. She ducked behind a dumpster, peering at the street. A figure loomed, the mask partially visible under the streetlight. The intruder had anticipated her move, and now the game had reached its apex. "Claire?" The voice carried across the empty street, calm, taunting, a whisper that made her stomach twist. "Stay away from me," she called, her voice firmer than she felt. She gripped the flashlight in one hand, a heavy wrench she had picked up from the alley in the other. Her only hope was to survive until Holly could intervene. The intruder's laugh echoed softly. "You think you can control this? You're playing my game now." Suddenly, movement, fast, precise, toward the warehouse. Claire bolted, her legs pumping as adrenaline surged. She knew the intruder would follow, but she also knew Holly's car was nearby. The chase was risky, but it was the only way to draw them into a place she could manipulate. Inside the warehouse, the darkness was almost complete. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, creating jagged patterns across crates and machinery. Claire ducked behind a stack of pallets, heart hammering, listening. Footsteps approached, deliberate, confident. "Claire?" The voice came again, closer now, almost reverent. "Why fight me? We could have been together." She froze. Together? The words were nonsensical, terrifying. Her mind raced. This person was unbalanced, obsessed beyond reason. Their fixation wasn't about revenge or theft. It was personal, intimate, and dangerous. Holly's voice came over a walkie-talkie, calm but tense. "Claire, stay put. I see the figure entering the warehouse. Don't engage. Wait for my signal." She swallowed hard, hiding behind the pallets, peering at the silhouette of the intruder moving through the shadows. Every instinct screamed to act, to strike first, but she knew Holly's experience was her lifeline. The intruder moved closer, stepping over scattered debris, their eyes or mask fixed on the space where she had been moments ago. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. She realized she had underestimated how deeply this person had studied her. They knew every move, every likely hiding spot, every potential escape route. Then came a sound she hadn't expected, a misstep, a small metallic clang as the intruder's foot struck a loose pipe. Claire's mind sharpened. This was her opportunity. She tightened her grip on the wrench and flashlight, waiting for the precise moment to act. "Claire," the intruder hissed, moving closer. "You can't hide forever. You belong to this night now." With a sudden burst, Claire leapt from behind the pallets, swinging the wrench. The intruder reacted instantly, but not fast enough to avoid the first strike. A grunt, a stumble, and then they lunged toward her. She ducked low, rolling behind another stack, breathing hard. "Detective!" she yelled. Holly's voice echoed back, confirming he was in position. The intruder, now fully exposed in the dim warehouse light, paused. Recognition flashed across their eyes, or what she could see through the mask. This was someone she had known, or at least she had thought she had trusted. A former co-worker, fired months ago for misconduct, whose obsession had grown into a dangerous fixation. "You!" Claire gasped, anger replacing some of the fear. "You were all this along!" The intruder laughed, a short, brittle sound, advancing. "You ruined me. You exposed me. You have no idea what you started." Holly appeared suddenly, gun drawn, voice steady. "Step back, now." The intruder hesitated, glancing between Claire and Holly. Panic flickered in their eyes, an emotion Claire had never seen from them before. This person who had controlled the shadows for weeks, who had manipulated her every move, was suddenly uncertain. Claire saw the chance. She charged, shoving the intruder backward, forcing them toward the warehouse exit where Holly could intervene. The intruder stumbled, recovered, lunging toward her again, but Holly was faster. A handcuff snapped to one wrist, another on the other, and the intruder's reign of terror ended with a sharp metallic click. Breathless, shaking, Claire sank to the floor, relief crashing over her in waves. The warehouse was now silent, save for the hum of distant traffic and Holly's calm voice. "You did well," Holly said, crouching beside her. "You kept your head, even when he tried to break you." I don't understand why," Claire whispered, still trembling. "Why me?" Holly shook his head.
He chose targets who scared easily, who had secrets he wanted to control. You weren't easy, Claire. That's why it escalated. That's why he followed you so meticulously. But you survived because you refused to be predictable. Claire nodded weakly, still staring at the masked figure now restrained on the warehouse floor. Weeks of terror, fear, and paranoia had culminated in this single moment of confrontation. Yet even as relief flooded her, a subtle unease lingered. The intruder had been patient, meticulous, obsessive. Someone like that didn't always act alone. Back at the apartment, the neighbors whispered among themselves, shaken but relieved. The police processed the scene, confirming no one else had been inside. Yet in the quiet streets, shadows flickered across windows, leaving Claire with the haunting sense that the night wasn't entirely over. Weeks later, Claire returned home, changed. She installed new security systems, reinforced locks, and still kept a baseball bat under her bed. But even with all precautions, a faint fear lingered, the awareness that someone, somewhere, might still be watching. Detective Holly filed the report, noting the unusual nature of the case. He knew that obsessive criminals like this one often left traces, hints that others might exploit. And while Claire was safe, for now, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone else might be observing the aftermath, quietly, patiently, waiting for the next night. Claire locked her door, breathing deeply, and stared out at the moonlit street. The night had tested her, almost broken her, but she had survived, outsmarted a predator, and reclaimed control of her life. And yet, deep down, she knew this was a victory tinged with caution. Fear had been a teacher, and she had learned well. The night was quiet, too quiet, and somewhere, in a shadowed window across the street, a figure watched.